What is up, YouTube? Welcome to The Pocket. My name is Scooter, here to present to you my 2024-2025 Giants season prediction. Now, this is going to be my first video. I am a Giants fan, and I'm going to do my best to be as unbiased as I possibly can. So, a little preview. We're going to talk about the offseason moves, the coaching changes, the NFL draft, the 53-man roster, my season predictions, and my week one predictions for the Giants. So let's get right into it. Without further ado, starting off with a preview of last season. Last season was pretty disastrous from the get-go. Week one, we had a lot of hype going into that Cowboys game, but things just did not go our way at all. We got exposed very badly for our lack of depth, our bad offensive line, our lack of coaching at other positions besides head coach and offensive coordinating. We just got exposed overall, and then we suffered some injuries. Andrew Thomas, and that bad luck didn't slow down. Saquon Barkley got hurt week 2 against the Cardinals with a high ankle sprain. So that's our two best offensive players who got injured right off the bat. The offensive line suffered more injuries weeks 3 and 4 at the interior where we were already weak. And by that point, our team was already decimated, and we were looking like the worst team in football. Against the Dolphins, Daniel Jones suffered a neck injury, so things were just still getting worse. Tyrod came in and played pretty well. I think the coaching staff kind of got a hold of what we were dealing with, how we were going to have to play offense. Our defense stayed relatively healthy, so they were playing strong, even though they were letting up some big plays. But fast forward a couple weeks, Daniel Jones comes back versus the Raiders and tears his ACL, and the season seems basically over. And the Caleb Williams talk, the first overall pick talk, that all started to begin. Now, we did have a certain third-string quarterback come in and go on a little run for us, Tommy DeVito, capping it off with a win Monday night against the Green Bay Packers. I forget which week it was. And then I'm pretty sure we lost out for the rest of the season, except for the final week against the Philadelphia Eagles. By that point, our team looked completely different from the team that started the season, and last year was just a very forgettable year for the Giants. But I think there were a couple takeaways that we'll come back to later on. So, moving on to the offseason changes. Just get this out of the way. Darren Waller retired. Super disappointed in how he looked last year. I get the offense was pretty anemic and couldn't block and things of that nature, and wasn't healthy with some of our best players, but still really disappointing to see how we made a move for him and we really didn't get anything out of him. Then at coaching, the coaching changes. Offensive coordinator is unchanged, but Brian Daboll did announce just today that he's taking over the play calling duties. So what is Mike Kafka there for? I'm not sure. Maybe just to kind of help in some way, shape, or form. Watch the film, get some notes for Brian Daboll. Either way, no changes at offensive coordinator, but I do like that Daboll will be calling the plays. Defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale leaves as he had a falling out with Brian Daboll, which was pretty unfortunate, as even though his defense had some pros and cons, letting up some big plays, but also forcing some turnovers and getting some sacks with the blitzes that he would run, we replaced him with Shane Bowen. I could be misspeaking here, but it seems like his scheme is kind of the polar opposite, where he plays more of a zone-heavy defense that sits back and completely relies on tackling well, keeping everything in front of them and rushing for, keeping a lot of people in coverage, not giving quarterbacks a lot of answers and places to go when those 4 guys are getting the pass rush. It's kind of that bend, don't break defense, because when you keep all those guys in coverage and the field shortens as you get closer to the red zone, it gets more difficult to pick apart the zones that the defense is giving to you. So I'll talk more about that later, but I do think that was a good move to pick up the Titans defensive coordinator, as that defense has played pretty well over the past couple seasons. And then something that's not a coordinator change, but an offensive line coaching change. Bobby Johnson is let go and replaced by Raiders offensive line coach Carmen Brasilla, which is also going to have a couple more strings come along. As you can see, who we had signed in free agency. So I think that was a great move. Obviously, the offensive line has been a huge issue for the Giants for many, many years. So sometimes you can't just draft players to fix it. You got to change the coaching, and We've gone through a couple offensive line coaches, but I've got hope for Carmen Brasillo. He had that Raiders offensive line playing pretty well down the stretch. So that's something I wanted to note. Then we'll go into the draft. I'll cover the 53-man roster after. I know free agency happened first, but we let a lot of those guys go. So for the draft, first round pick, we select Malik Nabers at 6th overall. I'll talk more in my big questions and talking points section, but I'm just going to stay here. I did not want the Giants to trade up or draft a quarterback at this spot. I didn't think the roster was ready for a new quarterback. That's how we got into this situation to begin with, where with Daniel Jones, where we broke his confidence with a bad team that didn't really support him that well. Yeah, he had his flaws with the turnovers and stuff, but he cleaned that up. And even when he did that, it's been tough for him to develop behind this offensive line especially, and lack of weapons. And the only thing we really figured out for him is the play calling. So if you want to throw a new young quarterback into that situation, that's your bold take. He would have to be a guaranteed guy, but even those guaranteed guys, some of them are probably lost in history because they went to bad teams and never really reached their potential. So I like to pick a Malik Nabers. It's going to be good for years to come. Give us a true alpha wide receiver that we haven't had since the loss of Odell Beckham when we traded him. So I think that was the right way to go. Second round, we take Tyler Nubin. Pretty clear what we're doing here. We let go of Xavier McKinney because we felt like we could get this guy on a rookie contract, a very similar safety, who doesn't have the best athletic traits but is very instinctive, makes plays on the ball, very smart, and someone we might put at free safety, kind of like we did with McKinney. So Minnesota safeties have a pretty good track record, just like LSU wide receivers, so I think that was a pretty good start to the draft. And then Andrew Phillips, corner out of, I believe, Kentucky. He's going to be the slot guy. There were some questions about whether he'd play on the outside, but we did end up signing Adoree Jackson to be that number 2 corner. Getting him back was a good move. Nice by Joe Schoen to let him hit the market and get him back on a cheaper deal. So Andrew Phillips, great coverage skills. His big drawback is he drops picks. I think you can live with that, right? Especially as your third corner. But if he can be, a good slot corner, then that's a great third-round pick right there. Fourth-round pick, this is where things not that I don't like this pick, but Theo Johnson, tight end out of Penn State, basically a super freak athlete. Outside of the fact that he might not be that agile, might not be that great of a route runner, but he certainly can go up and get the ball in the end zone, and that's what he did in college. So we're kind of eyeing him up as maybe what we wanted Darren Waller to be. In the meantime, Daniel Bellinger is going to start in his place, but he's got a lot of potential to take that position from Daniel Bellinger. Now, in the 5th round, we did lose Saquon Barkley, and our answer is to sign Devin Singletary and draft running back Tyrone Tracy, a converted wide receiver who showed great contact balance. I believe he's about 6 foot 215. Definitely got skills in the receiving game since he was a former wide receiver. And when you look at his college tape, he's a pretty explosive and powerful runner for not being humongous for a running back. Definitely smaller than Saquon Barkley. Definitely a step down, but in a committee backfield with Tracy and Singletary, I think you could do worse. And with the emergence of Eric Gray in the preseason. And then 6th round, we took Darius Musau. I hope I said that right, but he's an edge rusher. So that's just depth right there. Hoping you can develop him, capitalize on some of his traits. To be honest, I don't know too much about him. But that's what I've heard about him. So, moving on to the 53-man roster. Quarterback. Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito. We did add Drew Lock this year after losing Tyrod. I like that we kept DeVito. I think Drew Lock's a high upside backup who, as he proved last year, can win games against good teams if you give him enough surrounding him. Had that awesome game-winning drive against the Eagles. 2 great throws to DK on 3rd down. And that touchdown pass on the slot fade to Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think if we have guys like Malik Nabers and Wandale, continuing to grow, and then Hyatt as a downfield threat, of course Slayton's kind of the 4, then I think Drew Lock can take advantage of that as long as the offensive line keeps him upright, along with Brian Daboll's play calling. And then halfback, of course we lost Saquon Barkley, but if you watch the Hard Knocks, you could see how excited Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen were about signing Motor Singletary. They obviously have familiarity as they took him in when they were both in Buffalo. So there's got to be a lot of trust there. They know he can get the job done every single year. I'm pretty sure he's had over 1,000 scrimmage yards, so he's a capable guy. Just not gonna blow the brakes off of the defense, but as long as he's gonna go out there and execute his assignment at an acceptable level, you'll take that with the loss of Saquon Barkley, who even though he might exceed your expectations, as long as we have someone doing it right in the running game, I like that. And now you have Eric Gray, who looked good in the preseason as a bit more of an explosive receiving back, and then Tyrone Tracy, who looks to be more of the physical, possibly red zone back. Maybe also a threat in the receiving game. I think this is a decent running back room. Definitely bottom 8, bottom 5 in the league as of now. But I think it's got potential to be better than that. It depends a lot on the offensive line, though. And then at tight end, as we stated before, Daniel Bellinger and Theo Johnson are in a bit of a battle for that tight end 1 spot. I think Bellinger's got it for now. I think the team liked what they saw from Theo Johnson in the preseason. But, he's a young, kind of raw tight end who is going into a position that's already hard. And then in the NFL, there's even more that goes into it. They want you to block. They want you to not just be a red zone threat, but a reliable guy who can find spots in zone coverage and convert third downs. And maybe they don't think he can do that quite yet, but maybe by the end of the season we see him work in more. And then Chris Manhertz, who we signed in free agency, he's a blocking guy, pretty reliable, kind of like a better blocker, but maybe not as good of a receiver as Bellinger. And then at wide receiver, Malik Nabers as our alpha. I spent last night or 2 nights ago watching this guy's highlights, watching his preseason highlights. Man, these LSU wide receivers are just different. The way he runs routes, his contact balance when he gets hit, he's tough to tackle, good route runner, and he's physical at the catch point. You see him make catches over guys on those back shoulder fades, those dig routes. He's going to be a reliable target at the very worst. And you see, not to mention, he's great with, he's really fast. He's great with the ball in his hands. He's a screen threat. You can do everything with Malik Nabers, and that's something the Giants have needed for a long time. We did have Saquon Barkley, but you can't funnel an offense really through a running back as easily as you can through a wide receiver, in my personal opinion, because if you load the box, you are kind of, accounting for most of what the running back can do to hurt you, whereas with the wide receiver, whether you blitz or you leave everyone in coverage, you can throw them a screen. You can throw them a deep pass. You can give them a jet sweep. You can do all the same things you can do with a running back, except you're not splitting the running back out wide. So I think this is a good change for the Giants offense, and we want to throw the ball more. And part of what's going to make this work is Wan'Dale Robinson as our second receiver, although he's going to be the slot gadget guy. He looked pretty good last year. We did have to put him outside occasionally, and, he did all right, but we know he's best when he's in the slot. Just getting the ball into his hands as well, a little crossing routes, drags, screens, jet sweeps. He's explosive, he's fast, and he's quick. And he also has good catch and traffic skills. So I think he's going to be pretty reliable as the second leading threat on this offense. And him and Nabers are going to get a ton of volume, in my personal opinion. Now, are we going to be some incredible offense? Well, no, but we'll get to that. Now, fighting for the wide receiver 3 position, which is really the second outside wide receiver, Jalen Hyatt and Darius Slayton. I think Slayton's going to start week 1. There's been talks about how Jalen Hyatt has added weight and worked on his intermediate route running to be a more versatile receiver, but I just think Darius Slayton's been here long enough. He knows the scheme. This is a tough offense to pick up. It is year 2 for Jalen Hyatt, but I just think Daboll's going to trust Slayton a little bit more. They'll still rotate, but I think Slayton is kind of the 3. Hopefully Hyatt can break out, though, and utilize that outstanding speed that he has to be a good deep threat for this offense. And then the last 2, Bryce Ford-Wheaton looked pretty solid in the preseason, kind of a return guy, and so is Gunnar Olszewski. I think I said that right. He's really just a return guy. I mean, he could kind of play in the slot like Wan'Dale does, but both these guys are just serving as depth. Only keeping 6 receivers is pretty interesting, but I guess they got a lot of faith in the first 4 guys that we can get enough out of them and kind of rotate them and put them in different spots. So interesting wide receiving core. And then for the offensive line, I hope I got this layout right. Andrew Thomas at left tackle, and then his backup should be Josh Azwedu. Could be totally wrong. Left guard, John Runyon. who we added in free agency from the Packers. He's played really, really well, and I'm really excited to see how he can help the interior of the offensive line with his veteran presence. And then Jake Kubas is backing him up. Center, we have John Michael Schmitz entering year 2. Hopefully he added some weight to increase his play strength, getting a little more used to the IQ of playing center in the NFL, picking up those stunts. Wasn't getting much help from the guys to the left and right of him, but it's also on him to kind of be the leader of the offensive line, call these things out, identify them, and play as a more cohesive unit. Hopefully Coach Brasillo can coach him up a little bit more in that. And then Aaron Stinney, I believe, was taking backup reps at center when John Michael Schmitz was hurt in camp. So we're hoping that he can also, play guard at either position if, God forbid, there's more injuries to the other offensive line positions. And then right guard, I believe we're going to start Greg Van Roten, who we signed later in training camp, but he's also familiar with Carmen Brasillo and his coaching. So hopefully he can pick up the offense and be a reliable starter because he was good for the Raiders last year. Austin Schlottman, who we signed, I think he was a former Detroit Lion, should be solid depth. I mean, guys coming from that offense, guys getting cut from that offensive line are probably pretty good, right? Because they have the best offensive line in the league. They're backups. Every now and then those guys get hurt, and he's proven to come in and play pretty solid. Right tackle, we're hoping this wouldn't happen, but Jermaine Illuminor is going to play right tackle, and Evan Neal is going to be his backup and or be a guard backup. So we've got a couple swing guys here. Illuminor played well for the Raiders last year at right tackle. He's playing next to his buddy, Greg Van Roten, who he played with last year. Same offensive line coach. So hopefully that right side of the line can just be starter level, right? It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be starter level. Can't be a total liability like it was last year. And then, now, onto the defense. Interior defensive line, Dexter Lawrence. Obviously one of the three best interior defensive linemen in the league. I think he's definitely the best nose guard. You can argue that Quinnen Williams and Chris Jones are better, interior pass rushers. And Quinnen Williams might be a little better against the run, but when it comes to that unique role of getting pressure right up the middle from the nose guard position, nobody is better than Dexter Lawrence at that. So great to have a guaranteed top 3 offensive lineman in there. And then we have Elijah Chapman, DJ Davidson, Rakeem Nunez Roches, and Jordan Riley. So there's some solid depth there, but I don't think we really have a bona fide number 2. I hope Jordan Riley's out there. I do like him and what he brings to the table, but I think it's going to be a bit more of a rotation and situation kind of thing, whether it's a pass or a rundown. So I think we're pretty solid there. And now the edge group. Of course, we traded for Brian Burns from the Carolina Panthers. We saw a little bit of that on Hard Knocks. Joe Shane talking to his old colleague, cooking up a trade, planting the seed a couple weeks before, during the combine, I think it was, or something like that. So I think that was a great move to bring him in, put him opposite of Kayvon Thibodeaux, because then now you look at this depth chart at edge, and this room looks like maybe the best unit on our team. Because now you have Azeez Ojulari as your backup to Burns as a speed rusher, and then Boogie Basham, who we also signed, as your backup to Kayvon Thibodeaux. Now, backing up those two, you have Carter Coughlin, who's been kind of a special teams guy, and then Darius Mussau, who we drafted this year as a rookie. But this rotation, I think, is going to be quite awesome. We're going to be rushing for a lot. These dudes are going to get tired. They're going to have to come off the field. And I think Azeez and Boogie Basham can give us adequate, backup level play as Burns and Kayvon catch their breath and get back out there to kick some more ass. So, inside linebacker, we have Bobby Okereke. I'm a huge fan. Watching what he did last year with the anemic Giants offense, Giants defense was on the field all the time, and this dude just wouldn't quit. He was always chasing the ball, making great plays, being aggressive, getting interceptions, being in the right spot at the right time. Loved what I saw from him. And I loved even more what I saw from Micah McFadden, who is in no means going to be a Pro Bowler or anything like that. But as a second linebacker, he played pretty well last year. A couple games, I think the Bills game, the 49ers game, he was on the money. He wasn't falling for any of the tricks and schemes. He was finding the ball fast. He was getting there. He was making the tackles, TFLs, all that good stuff. So love what we're seeing from the linebacking room. Deontay Johnson, who I saw a little bit of in the preseason. Not really sure where he came from, but he looked pretty solid. So as a linebacker 3, he looks pretty good. And then Benton Whitley is our linebacker 4. Like I said, I didn't even really see much of him in the preseason. There was a lot of players getting rotated, so forgive me. But I'm sure he's fine for a 4th inside linebacker. Moving on to the secondary. Things were looking a little shady here. But a couple days ago, we did re-sign Adoree Jackson. Obviously, a former Giant who we allowed to hit the market. There was lots of great corners still left, like Xavier Howard, who aren't even paid yet. So he couldn't find enough money elsewhere, and he came back here, probably on a cheaper deal. So good move by Joe Schoen, good general management skills, and he's going to play number 2 to Deonte Banks. Or, they could be like a 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B sort of situation based on where they're at in their careers. But I think this really helps because Deonte Banks should take a leap in year 2 in the NFL. Corners are really, probably, in my opinion, it's got to be the hardest position, right, besides quarterback. At least on defense, you got to cover these wide receivers, and you can't grab them too much. You get called for holding all the time. It's got to be a tough position, especially with all these great quarterbacks who can put the ball in just the perfect spot for them to catch it. Even if you're just not a good enough athlete, you just can't play the position. So year 2, I'm expecting him to make a huge leap, as he played pretty well last year. Had some really, really good games, holding some talented receivers under 50 yards a couple times. So really looking forward to Deonte Banks year 2. And then we also drafted Andrew Phillips, as I stated before, slot guy, drops interceptions, so what? He's going to be your slot guy. He can tackle. He's a tough guy. And what adding him and Adoree Jackson does is it pushes guys like Cordell Flott, Trey Hawkins III, and Nick McLeod to be our depth now. Your nickel, your dime guys, they're not even going to be coming on the field for that because you got guys like Isaiah Simmons, who's listed in the safety category, but he just works out with the DBs in practice, and I kind of have a feeling we're going to attempt to put him in that Kyle Hamilton role that the Ravens had. And he's not Kyle Hamilton, but he's definitely better in the slot than guys like Cordell Flott when it comes to just tackling. You put him on the tight end, and then you tell Andrew Phillips to guard the slot wide receiver, and everything's all hunky-dory, right? So Isaiah Simmons, he's going to play into this nickel situation somehow. And I think Flott, Hawkins, and McLeod aren't bad depth guys. Yeah, they're not great tacklers, but Trey Hawkins isn't bad at tackling, and he's got a lot of traits. We put him one-on-one on Tyreek last year in Martindale's defense, sending a man blitz, and he kind of looked pretty bad for that, but who's guarding Tyreek one-on-one? Nobody. With no help over the top, that is. I don't even think Sauce was able to do that, even though I'm pretty sure in the game they played this year, I think Tyreek was hurt for one of them. Either way, I got a lot of faith in the secondary to not be a liability this year. I think it can be definitely good enough. And then at safety, Tyler Nubin and Jason Pinnock should be the starters. We talked about Isaiah Simmons before. Dane Belton and Javarius Owens, they'll get in there too. But I think it's definitely going to be mostly Tyler Nubin, who's going to be out there the most. I know he's a rookie, but reminds me a lot of Xavier McKinney, who was great his rookie season in a worse team. So hopefully he can give us that lateral move after letting him go, choosing not to pay him, using that money elsewhere. You get very similar player in the second round of the draft, and he's on a rookie contract. So I think pretty good general management skills, once again, from Joe Schoen, if that move works out. Long snapper, punter, Casey Kreider, Jamie Gillian as the punter, Fram Gano's our kicker. Don't really think special teams is a strength, but I don't really think it's that much of an issue either. So that's a 53-man roster. So now we're going to get into Hard Knocks. I've mentioned it before, talking about Saquon Barkley and Brian Burns. So I just want to touch on it a little more because I'm sure you guys are curious what my take is on the Saquon Barkley situation. Personally, I don't think he wanted to come back at all. I think he had his mindset on leaving. Really unfortunate because we really wasted most of his career. I don't think we really owed him anything. If he wanted to leave, he was free to do that. But But if it really was just a $500,000 that was holding him back from signing with us, that's on us. I get what Joe Schoen is saying about the injury stuff, and he's got a sore back already, so we'll see if maybe he ended up being right about that. Maybe the Giants organization knew something about some lingering issues that we didn't, but even a 80-90% Saquon Barkley is better than, at least half of the starting running backs in the NFL. So if you just manage his workload and just drafted Tyrone Tracy this year anyway, just to keep using him, I feel like it would have been smart to keep him, because now you got Saquon, so you got a good player on offense, and you can't tell me you couldn't afford all of these offensive linemen, or you couldn't have maybe drafted one in the draft if it continued to be an issue with the depth. I don't know. Does it hurt that he went to the Eagles? Absolutely. I really hate that he went to the Eagles. One of the most embarrassing days of my life, as I went to school in Pennsylvania and had to hear for about a week about how a division rival took our best player that is, although you could say it's definitely Dexter Lawrence, but best offensive player. Really unfortunate. But like I said, I don't really think he owed us anything. He's an individual player. He's got a family and career to think about, so if he wanted to leave, that's his choice. As for the rest of the Hard Knocks series, I think Joe Schoen is going to be here for quite a while, and so is Brian Dable. I really like the way that they presented their, and I'm sure every GM does this, but the amount of details and alternate scenarios that they were prepared for in free agency and the draft. Like I said, I'm sure every GM does it, but I just like the way that he talked about it. The composure he had when he said, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. If this happens, this is what we're going to do. It's like he had it all figured out for every reality, and that's what I want in a GM. Someone who can be flexible, someone who won't panic, someone who has a plan for a plan for a plan, right? So that's my takeaway from Hard Knocks. Should have paid Saquon if he wanted to stay, and we should definitely keep Brian Dable and Joe Schoen, because they're the only ones keeping this organization's head above water. And then my last talking point before the questions is going to be, should we have taken a quarterback in the draft? And like I said, I don't think so. I don't think we were ready to start a new young quarterback, put him in this terrible situation. I mean, you're already paying Daniel Jones, so you can't use money to boost up the roster for the new quarterback, and you're using a top 6 pick on the quarterback himself, so you got to either trade up draft capital to get a player you want. Even though this was a deep wide receiver class, I think there definitely was a big tier jump after the Brian Thomas Jr. went, and I don't think we were going to get him, and it just wouldn't have panned out well. My point of view is, if we are to move on from Daniel Jones, which I'm pretty sure we can get out of his contract after next year by cutting him and it pretty much costing us nothing moving forward, if we want to move on from him, we need to prepare, right, for the next quarterback who's going to come in. We can't just say it's all Daniel Jones' fault, right, and just replace him and hope everything gets better because there's a new quarterback. This is 11 people on offense, 11 people on defense, and in my personal opinion, those 5 offensive linemen combined, the offensive line group, is more important than the quarterback. Look at what teams like Detroit can do, what teams like the 49ers can do that have a great scheme, right? And I know the 49ers offensive line isn't that great, but they do have Trent Williams, right? But the scheme is so good that it kind of hides the weaknesses. And also, they have weapons. They have Deebo Samuel. They have Brandon Ayuk. They have George Kittle. They have Christian McCaffrey. They have Jawan Jennings, and now they drafted Ricky Pearsall. They're going to be finding weapons. Lions, they got Amon-Ra. They got Laporta. They got Gibbs. They got Montgomery. They have Jamison Williams. Eagles, top offensive line. You can talk as great praise as you want about Jalen Hurts. He's got a very friendly situation. And you know what? All of these quarterbacks, Purdy, Jared Goff, and Jalen Hurts, they inherited these situations, right? They inherited these good offensive lines. Ben Johnson, Kyle Shanahan, and Shane Steichen was there for the Eagles when Jalen Hurts broke out. So we have the coach, right? We have Brian Dable, but we don't have the offensive line and we didn't have the weapons. So we took a step. We added an alpha wide receiver. You're going to hope Wandale and Hyatt can be the 2 and the 3. Theo Johnson can be the tight end. This is a lot of stuff that needs to work out right. But you know what? If you make sure you have at least one of them, it's a good start. So, questions. Can the offensive line hold up, right? Can that happen? Because that's one of the things that needs to happen for the Giants to reach their ceiling. Offensive line's got to be at least average. We've seen in the playoff year, when it stayed healthy, the offense was new, caught some teams off guard, won a couple one-score games, but the offensive line was playing all right. It was giving Daniel Jones time. He wasn't forcing as many balls, less turnovers, less interceptions. So do I think they're going to hold up their end of the bargain? I certainly think they're going to be like better than bottom 8, right? So that would be 32 through 26 or 24. I think we can be the 24th best offensive line in the league. We have a new coach. We still have a great play caller. And we've added some depth, right? So if we suffer some injuries, except for if it's to Andrew Thomas, I think we can survive, right? So I do think the Giants' offensive line is going to hold up their end of the bargain. And then can Daniel Jones prove that he hasn't been the problem all these years? I think if the offensive line does what I say they will, and they play as a top 24 unit, right, they're somewhere in there, then I do think he's going to come close to the Giants' ceiling, come close to a 500 season. He might not throw for 28 touchdowns or 26 or even 24, right? Of course, he's going to have some rushing sprinkled in there. But if he doesn't force turnovers like he did when he made the playoffs, right? It was only like 16 touchdown passes, but like 4 interceptions or something. Then, yeah, I think he's going to prove, yeah, maybe I'm not a top 10 quarterback in the league, but I'm definitely not the issue here, right? I can be a Kirk Cousins, who's probably the best version of what Daniel Jones could ever be, right? Somewhere around there. And you compare his stats, career wins and passing to guys like Trevor Lawrence, and it's pretty similar. And Trevor Lawrence suffered for 1 year under a bad coaching staff, then got Doug Peterson and made the playoffs. So it's crazy how much 1 year can change. If people don't want to believe that the Giants can exceed expectations this year, then you're probably betting against this offensive line and Daniel Jones. All right, and then can we live without Saquon Barkley? With Malik Neighbors, yes, I do think we can. I talked earlier about the benefit of having your best offensive weapon be a wide receiver as opposed to a running back. We saw what Christian McCaffrey was on a team like the Panthers, where, yeah, sure, he got a ton of volume, but I think they made the playoffs, but they just were no match for the upper echelon of teams. But when you go to a team that has like a star wide receiver, take for instance like the Vikings, after Dalvin Cook was kind of like on his downward trajectory in his career. I remember drafting him in fantasy thinking he was going to be great, and he wasn't, but Justin Jefferson was elite, right? So if you have like an average running back and an elite wide receiver, then you can make the playoffs, right? You can even win 13 games, even if they are one-score games, because you can move the chains by passing the ball or giving him jet sweeps, screens. You can attack the defense in almost any way with a wide receiver. With a running back, they can completely suffocate you, right? Because they know who the ball's going to. Now, can Shane Bowen pick up where Wink Martindale left off? I do think so. It's a different scheme. It's going to be more bend, don't break, less trying to force turnovers, more just playing it safe and then tackling. If the secondary can execute right and keep things in front of them and tackle, or play good enough coverage so that the 4-man pass rush gets there, I think the defense is set up to do that. I mean, we've got a young secondary with players that are going to have the scheme benefiting them, as we're only going to be rushing 4. That means more guys in coverage, which means their job is easier. And then we have our best players being relied on the most, that being Brian Burns, who I know he hasn't proven it yet on the Giants, but he's definitely one of our best defensive players. Dexter Lawrence, and then Kayvon, and as I mentioned before, the edge depth is also very quality. So we are relying on our best players, right? And I do believe in them. I think the reason we've won games last year and that year we went to the playoffs was because of our defense. It wasn't really as much because of our offense. Brian Daboll just got it done, right? He got it done, but he wasn't working with anything to actually optimize what his like scheme and his talents are as a coach. He was just playing the clock well, playing good game situations, and making sure he wasn't losing us the game and our defense was doing the same thing, and it just all just happened to work out. So the answer is yes. I think Shane Bowen is a pretty lateral move from Wink Martindale. You look at what the Titans defense has been over the past couple of years. I think we might even have a more talented defense than they've had. And we're kind of in a similar situation where their offense wasn't really all that great. So, yeah, pretty excited about Shane Bowen. And then my last question is Kayvon Thibodeaux and Evan Neal. What are we going to get from them? Former top 10 draft picks. Starting with Kayvon, I've kind of been alluding to this. I think him being a number 2 is going to be the best thing that's ever happened. When we drafted him as a number 1, it didn't work out. That doesn't mean that he still can't be a valuable player to us, right? If we can use him, and people question how he wasn't getting pressures, right? Well, if he's the number 1 guy and he's going against the best offensive lineman, it's gonna be tough to do that, right? Especially if you aren't him, right? If you aren't a top 10 guy, but if you're going up against the right tackle, and Burns is getting double teamed or chipped by the running back, or they're doubling inside on Dexter Lawrence, he's going to get nice one-on-one matchups, and hopefully he gets more pressures. And not for nothing, he might not get that many pressures, and I, for one, I do think pressures are important. Some people are like, oh, it doesn't matter, I only care if it's a sack. Pressures are absolutely important. That's part of what has really made Daniel Jones struggle, is even on the plays where he doesn't get sacked, he's always under pressure, and it makes you make bad decisions. So I think we're going to get way more out of Kayvon Thibodeaux. But Evan Neal, man, I've had a lot of hope for him over the past couple years, but I just can't get there with him anymore. The slow foot speed, the lack of ability to pick up stunts and IQ, it just looks like he has got a lack of confidence out there. Even if it's with like the lack of cohesiveness of the offensive line, I just got to see it before I start saying I believe it anymore. So to finish off this video, I want to talk about my season predictions for the Giants and my Week 1 predictions. Starting off with Week 1, I think the Giants are going to win. Now, the Vikings at the end of the season might be a better team than the Giants, right? But they've suffered a lot of injuries. TJ Hawkinson's coming off a torn ACL. Jordan Addison's already banged up. The offensive line's healthy, but J.J. McCarthy gets a torn meniscus, and I know Sam Darnold was probably going to start Week 1, but you don't know what was going to happen. Maybe Darnold stunk it up, and they were just throwing McCarthy in there, and then he would have been the starter, and maybe he would have been great. But now you'll never know. Not until next year, or maybe the end of the season, that is. So, and then not to mention, they've had a really tragic preseason. One corner, their second-year corner tore their ACL, and there was a tragedy where their rookie corner, Kyrie Jackson, was killed on a highway by a drunk driver who was like merging or swerving through lanes or something. It's just really, really unfortunate that someone making such a selfish decision for their own amusement resulted in the death of a young man with such great potential to have such a great life and start a family and all this stuff. It's really upsetting. It really is. So I do want to make a comment about that before I continue with the game prediction. But yeah, it's just don't drink and drive. Don't do it. So the Vikings are really, really down right now. They've got a lot of bad momentum and juju right now. And I think the Giants are going to capitalize on it. I mean, you look at what the Giants their weaknesses are. It's offensive line, it's unproven wide receiving core, and it's, question mark Daniel Jones. Can he win games? First of all, Daniel Jones has beaten a better version of this team before, right? And it was because their defense wasn't good enough. And now they lose Danielle Hunter, right? Dallas Turner's there, I get it, but it's his first NFL game. He's not going to be anywhere near what Danielle Hunter was. You lose all these guys in the secondary, and things are going to look like might be one of the worst defenses in the league, right? I get Brian Flores is there, and maybe, just maybe, he gets some looks that confuse Daniel Jones. It's possible that the Giants don't expose their defense. But I think it's going to be pretty tough for them to do that because it's not like you don't have a good offensive coordinator having that mental battle with the defensive coordinator, right? So if those guys cancel out and it's just the offensive roster versus defensive roster, I think the Giants roster can score at least 24 points, right? If they don't, I'll be very sad. Don't want to talk about it. But that's what I see happening. And then I think our defense, right? Yeah, they got Justin Jefferson, but who else do they have right now? Right? They got a great offensive line in Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson. Okay. Well, we have a allegedly good defensive coordinator, a great front seven, Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden, Dexter Lawrence, Jordan Riley, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Brian Burns with nice depth to rotate in there, and then a young secondary who we just re-added Adoree Jackson to. I think it's going to be enough to just get in the way, right? They'll score points, but I don't think it's going to be enough to beat the Giants because I think we're going to have more consistency on offense compared to what they're going to have to deal with. So I do think we win week 1. Either my official prediction is 24 to 23. I'm bringing it a little bit closer. Could it be a little bit more high scoring? Yeah, but in the end of the day, I think the Giants kick a game-winning field goal, and that's how we start off the season. Now, for the rest of the season, the schedule's manageable in the first half, but in the second half of the season, it is terrible. Our last 7 games are like all playoff teams from last year, or teams that are projected to be way better than they were last year. So that's so unfortunate. And we'd have to really have a strong start to the season if we wanted to come close to 500. But let's talk about the ceiling and the floor real quick. I think this is pretty straightforward. We saw the Giants' floor last year. Everything went wrong. But the Giants refused, the coaching staff mainly, refused to lose. They refused to tank, and we still won 6 games somehow. If you think the Giants' roster is somehow going to be worse than it was halfway through last year, 2/3 of the way through last year, then you're just projecting injuries, right? Like, you really think Daniel Jones, Andrew Thomas, let's just say Malik Neighbors, all these guys get injured? Yeah, sure. The Giants are going to be pretty close to their floor. But, yeah, sure, the defense stayed relatively healthy last year. But the ceiling was, with, I would argue, a worse roster than we are at currently, 9-7-1, right? So whether you want to say it's 9 or 10 wins, the range of outcomes is somewhere between 6 to 9 wins to 6 to 10 wins. Now, when you explain a team's ceiling and floor, there's also something that goes into where you expect them to land on that scale. Now, where they land on that scale is, to me, determined by unknowns, right? What are you uncertain about? Let's take last year's Texans team, for example. A lot of people had them projected as a bottom 3 team, but you know what? They had a brand new quarterback, a brand new head coach. They added a top 3, probably the best defensive player in last year's draft class. And they also weren't terrible, right? The year before, I mean, they were the second worst team in the league, right? 1 play away from having basically the number 1 overall pick or third, I forget what it was, but they were playing close against good teams. So they were kind of there, and I feel like that's kind of what the Giants were. We're kind of there in some games last year, just didn't have enough, right, at a quarterback or offensive line. But all these new things, and the Texans look like a brand new team, right? So what brand new things do the Giants have? Well, we have Malik Neighbors, so we have a new offensive X factor, alpha, whatever you want to call it. We have some added depth to the offensive line. Okay, kind of the same. We lost Saquon Barkley, so maybe that cancels out with Malik Neighbors. Play calling's the same on offense. Had a little bit of a play call difference on defense, right? Now we have Shane Bowen, so you could maybe project the defense to be, say, top 10 and say that's going to be a big reason why. Maybe. So we have a new defensive coordinator, a couple new players on defense, and not too much has changed on offense besides, I would say, just adding depth and changing philosophy a little bit to be more pass-heavy, which is Brian Daboll's strength, I would say. So, with that being said, same quarterback and everything, I just am not in the camp that we have enough new to really hit our ceiling. We'd have to get super lucky and stay pretty healthy. And the defense would have to be top 10. So where do I think we land? I think we get 7 wins. I think that's pretty reasonable too. The Giants are just going to find a way to win games they shouldn't. Teams that are better than them are going to lose to the Giants because Brian Daboll is a better coach, or Daniel Jones just goes a game without having an interception or getting sacked 6 times. And that's going to be enough for the Giants to win some games that they shouldn't. So if that can all happen, 7 wins. 7 and 10. Player predictions. I'll be talking about 5 players. Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, and Kayvon Thibodeau. For Daniel Jones, I stated before about how even when we made the playoffs, he wasn't that productive. I think we'll see something similar this year, whether it's even a winning season or not. I do think this could be the first year he breaks 4,000 passing yards. We don't have Saquon Barkley anymore, so we're not going to be a run-heavy team. I do think we'll still mix in some of that read option that we use for Daniel Jones. So I think, but him coming off the ACL is going to hinder that just a little bit. So I think 500, 400 to 600 rushing yards, but I think 500 sounds about right with like 4 rushing touchdowns, 4,000 passing yards. It's a little optimistic. And then I think 20 touchdown passes. We're going to pass more. We're not going to have like 10 rushing touchdowns from Saquon Barkley. I think our leading back might only have like 5 rushing touchdowns. So I'm not saying the Giants offense is going to like score way more touchdowns than they have in the past, but I think more of them will be passing touchdowns. And then like 8, 9 turnovers, 8 picks, 1 fumble, 5 picks, 3, 4 fumbles, something like that. Malik Neighbors, he's going to have like a 28% target share. Brian Daboll loves this guy. The Giants staff wanted to draft Rome Odunze, but Brian Daboll basically made sure that it was Malik Neighbors. Pretty glad about that. Rome's a great player, but Malik Neighbors with the ball in his hands, like I said, even a screen threat, just as well as he has a downfield threat. So I think he can eclipse 100 receptions. Jalen Waddle did it in a mediocre offense his rookie year on the Dolphins. He did it by catching a bunch of screen passes and just being that elite threat. He was over 1,000 yards. I think he had like 1,150. So I think Malik Neighbors can even get 1,200. But I would say 100 receptions, 1,150 yards, and then 8 touchdowns. As I think he's definitely a better red zone threat than Jalen Waddle was as a prospect. So definitely projecting out a great season for Malik Neighbors. And then the defense. Kind of tough to project corners, so I'm focusing mostly on the defensive line. The 3 biggest guys who are going to be part of that 4-man pass rush. That's going to be Brian Burns, who I think does take a step up this year on a better defense than he was in Carolina, and he's going to have 14 sacks. Pressure rates and amount of pressures, that's really hard to project, right? Especially changing teams. Same goes for the rest of the guys. I'm not doing pressures, just sacks. Kayvon, I think he can get 8, right? 8 to 10, but more pressures. My official projection would be 9, right? So we have 14, 9, and then Dexter Lawrence. I say he also gets 8 or 9. So pretty good combination right there. Of course, we'll have some other guys blitzing, some other guys getting sacks. But those are my player predictions. Any of the rest of them, just wish I had more time, but it would be kind of absurd to try to predict the stats of an entire team. So I just tried to pick, I'd say 5 key guys, right? So that should conclude it. Thank you guys for watching my Giants 2024-2025 preview. I'm very excited for this season, as kind of hard to get worse than last year. So you can only really hope and expect that we're going to win more games this year. Thanks for watching my first video, and if you want to see more, hit the notification bell and subscribe, and give me a like. I'm going to be working pretty hard to get these videos out once a week. The Instagram page, optimistically, like I said, 2 to 3 posts a week, and I'm just going to be doing my best. This is something I've wanted to do for a really long time, so your support is going to mean a lot. It's going to give me that extra motivation and reassurance that I'm doing this right, I'm doing it well. So, once again, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.